Welcome to The Screen Queen, the show where I'll be talking about your favorite TV show or your favorite movie. You'll just have to listen to find out. This is your host, Samantha Parrish. Hello there, and welcome back to the show. As always, I am your lean, mean movie talking machine, and I'm bringing the scares that care. I am so excited for this. The Halloween series was such a huge hit last year. The holiday events that I make on The Screen Queen are my favorite highlights being a host on the show. As much as it is a joy to talk about movies and TV shows and get to hear that people love the show and it gives them a lot of comfort, that it helps them feel less alone, it is nice that I get to take a month for specific movies and TV shows that haven't really gotten around the circulating system yet, just to give it an extra little push to get out there. And I gotta say, what I have to say, I do find it incredibly ironic that last year we opened up with a classic film from 1982, and here we are again with a classic film from 1982. I'm starting to think my Vanna White system is not as random as I thought when it keeps making these coincidences, but it is a hilarious specific coincidence. Not even Effie Trinket from the Hunger Games could be able to have this strange coincidence if she tried. Coincidence aside, it is nice to open up the series with a classic that took some time to be a classic, and I'm going to be sharing a lot of details about that. But I will say, the research that I've done about those details, it has really made me change the way I thought about this film. And that's the other thing that I love about doing this show, is being challenged to see if I can feel differently about a film that I may have spoke too soon about, or maybe I didn't see something the first time. That's why I do this show, to help me see something I didn't see before and share that with others. So for those out there that have never seen this remake from 1982, I will give you the plot of it, because I don't believe in keeping people in the dark. The characters might, but I don't. So I'm going to read the synopsis from IMDb, because trust me, this is a very detailed movie and I might accidentally give a very detailed explanation. IMDb is doing both of us a favor. So here we go. A research team in Antarctica is hunted by a shape-shifting alien that assumes the appearance of its victims. Now, with that said, it was a ballsy move to do something different than its predecessor, which was A Thing from Another World, made by Christian Nigby. And John Carpenter, who is the director of this film, he sought out to make something different with The Thing. If you are familiar, sorry about that, I just hit a hanger in my room because, that's all I have hanging out with me. Anyway, sorry about that. If you're familiar with John Carpenter, then you'll know him for a very famous babysitter slasher called Halloween. And he was torched for that film, saying that he went after babysitters. It's like, well, the whole thing about horror is, how does a threat get close to something very innocent? What's something that we would never fathom in our wildest dreams? And John Carpenter brought that for many, 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 many years. But despite the backlash he got with Halloween, it didn't take long for many moviegoers to love the thrill of Michael Myers and the future stories about Michael Myers. And they're like, put this guy on the horror movie map. We got us a new one. It's true, we wouldn't really have the certain horror films we have today if it wasn't for John Carpenter being one of the trailblazers of horror. And he continued that with The Fog, and people were back for The Fog going, you done it again, John. We love you. And then The Thing came along, and crickets. When he made The Thing, there was negative reactions to The Thing. People did not like it. They didn't find it to be, controversial. They were just, being a little too forthright before giving it a shot, like most of us can be, unfortunately. So it just wasn't a good time for John Carpenter back then. And the sad thing is, ironically, sad thing about The Thing, the original creator, Christian Nigby, denounced Carpenter's version and said that he would rather recommend another film for people to watch, to not see the continuation of his story. You know, that's just a major slap in the face. Like, if I made something if I made something that was inspired by someone that I idolized, or was a film that inspired me, and the creator of that said to me, yeah, I don't like what you did, I'm insulted, oh, I'd be crying into a fucking bucket of ice cream, I don't mind telling you. John Carpenter had the strongest guts and the strongest heart at that time to tackle all of that negative reception, until the day came that someone was like, hey, maybe we spoke too soon about The Thing, because now you can't go anywhere without The Thing being referenced or being the inspiration for other future films. It was a major trailblazer. And that's coming from someone that does not watch sci-fi movies. I watched The Thing to finally see what the hype was about, because I had heard it was such a great movie. But then to find out back then, people didn't think it was a great movie, and it took time for it to get to the proper acclaim it has today. But if that wasn't enough with the initial negative response that The Thing had, it had to go up against the biggest blockbusters of cinema history. It opened the same day as Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, you know, competing with the guy that just made an Alien film not too long ago. You know, and in the irony, speaking on that, Blade Runner also bombed that day, so you have two films that are now regarded as masterpieces when they weren't regarded as masterpieces back then. But there was another film that did get some success, and it's a little film called E.T. So, ironically, the only Alien film that worked that year, or any sci-fi movie that worked that year, had to be a little lovable alien that said, I'll be right here. You know, kind of ironic, isn't it? I say this with all honesty, and I had to think it through before I said this. There is no Alien movie quite like The Thing. And I know that is a very strong thing to say, because any other Alien film we have usually follows the coattail of Alien from 1979 and some of the sequels that followed that. There's always going to be some staple in the sci-fi genre that does something different or better, and The Thing is different as much as it is better in its own sense for making something different for the terror from space onto Earth, whereas Alien is just terror in space. Vastly different and beautiful in their own way. Alien did something with you can't scream in space, and then you have something like The Thing where you're in an isolated territory where no one is coming to help you. It's that helplessness that you have to feel from a sci-fi film, knowing these characters have to do whatever they can to protect themselves from a threat from another world. But when I was writing this episode, it really had to make me think, why is The Thing different than Alien? I mean, I just mentioned why it's different than Alien, but for another reason that I knew that it stood out. And I was reading what John Carpenter had said when he watched Alien, and it helped him figure out how to make a different Alien film, is that in Alien, you can clearly tell that that is a guy in a suit. And that is expertise. I love me a good gymnast that can be able to make this like murder run or this predatory run. You know, I love it. It gives it a very lifelike feel. But at the same time, that can be overdone so many times to the point that it feels like an episode of Scooby-Doo where you're waiting to unmask the person. John Carpenter sought out to make sure that this alien did not look like a man in a suit, that it would be impossible to think that it's a man in a suit. If you've seen clips of The Thing, you clearly see a body opening up from the inside to eat the arms of another character. And you watch this thing rise up, and it gets just like very animated. It almost looks a little bit cartoony, but works to the benefit of looking otherworldly. John Carpenter accomplished that. That's definitely not a guy in the suit. With the way that he utilized stop motion photography and any sorts of animation he could get his hands on, he did make something that was and is the game changer to alien films. The film, despite, like I said, that it was not given its proper acclaim until years down the road, is now considered the mile marker for special effects with makeup. The effects were created by a guy named Rob Bottin, who was only 22 years old when he was given the task of making the scariest alien ever made. Besides, Alien. This dude is one of the unsung heroes that doesn't get talked about enough about The Thing. Now, even though John Carpenter poured his heart and soul into this film, rallying to have it done, he worked with the cast, he worked with the crew, he had a spot in every single department. But Rob Bottin is one of the unsung heroes that doesn't get talked about enough for being the guy behind the whole helm of the new Alien to bring to the screens. But Rob Bottin, woof, he worked himself to exhaustion. He was forced to take a break when he was diagnosed with exhaustion. He was admitted to the hospital. He worked in every single part of the film. There's a scene where the dog is taken over, and I've only seen The Thing one time because I don't think it's available anywhere else for me to watch it. No, it's not, unfortunately, so I'm going off of pure memory. But I did read that there was a scene where the dog is taken over, and this is our censure of a possible implied nature to the plot that the dog is the alien, possibly. It's never 100% confirmed, but we do see the fact that the dog has these, tendrils and little, wisps whipping out of him, and for that to happen, Rob Bottin was underneath, maneuvering the whips with his own hands in a very fervent nature, so we can see, this thing is coming out. It is, the first threat that we see that there is something now in this camp. And like I said, it's still implied that the dog may be the source of how the thing got in, or maybe it got in through one of the workers. It's completely up in the air. But having the initial reaction with the dog definitely sets the stage, and we had someone working those whips to make sure that you got to feel the fear that, oh shit, something's inside the fucking camp. But the one thing, I'm gonna be so tired of saying that word after the end of this episode, something that I never thought about with this movie is how much it prides itself on handmade work. John Carpenter went through the process of using household items to be able to make very gritty, gooey, icky, gross, grotesque things. Like, there's a scene with the autopsy, and that was made from paper and egg yolks. You can get, that weird, fleshy consistency that it's just, falling off. And it's, that's kind of what alien skin does. It just has, a goopiness to it. I've never not seen an alien film that didn't have something goopy or icky involved. And he made that with egg yolks and paper. That's impressive. There's also another nice touch that I never noticed is that John Carpenter went through the colors of the film to make sure that every one of the cast members had a gray, blue, kind of a dreary color, so that way when the shape-shifting alien presents itself, it has these vibrant colors, so it literally pops off the screen. We're not feeling that the alien is in muted colors. It would need to be a little bit different. It does need to stick out, and the only way is to make sure the cast itself is muted in colors for the first vibrant consistency of colors to literally pop off the screen. And after I read that John Carpenter did that, it really made me appreciate the film again for something that completely went over my head. Now it all makes sense why all of the characters are wearing muted colors, and that it was on purpose to make sure that the colors of the alien pops out more, so it feels more like a shock, that it is something very different. Alien colors are always going to be having something that is a little bit more consistent with unusual palette of colors. And, comparing that to Alien, all we ever saw from Alien was, well, green and black and green. I love the movies, don't get me wrong, but the thing was having a bit more of a color palette than the Alien movie did. Okay, as much as I've talked about the shape-shifting alien, I want to give a little special spotlight onto what is not talked about, which is the hero. Well, we're going to put quotes around the word hero, but the main character, McGrady, played by Kurt Russell. From what I understand, Kurt Russell has collaborated a lot with John Carpenter. They worked on Escape from New York, and they went into another film together to do The Thing. So he finally had Kurt Russell for one of the staples he's known for in the horror genre, and that being an alien horror film. Kurt Russell was like, sign me up. However, the only thing that did hurt the film is not getting to know more about McGrady. From what I remember when I watched the film, I felt like I didn't know much about the characters. And that can be a good and bad thing, where the horror is mainly supposed to be centered around watching these characters survive or die horrifically. And that's the whole point of the film, is that you watch the body count rise with this shapeshifter hunting them down. And because these are all characters that are very smart in their own way, that does give the edge, knowing that they can't trust each other, that they would rather turn on each other so fast. McGrady being one of them, to put aside the patience and put forth the logic that if there's an alien in the room and it's in one of the people he knows, he can't trust them. It's a logical thing to do. He's a very logical character. However, we don't really get to know more about him, and it turns out in the original script there was going to be an exploration of his character being a Vietnam vet with PTSD, and that was going to make its way into the film. Knowing that, don't quote me on this, but I feel like that might have helped the film to have a character come through that has PTSD. He's already fighting his own mind, and now he has to fight a species from another planet. That does sound very convincing, and it does sound very intriguing. But due to the restrictions of what's going on during the film, that a lot of things are being poured into the alien itself, there had to be some corners to cut, and one of the corners that was cut was McGrady's whole storyline. However, because of the fact that it was cut, Kurt Russell did everything he could to make sure this was a very layered character, despite not getting to see the other layers about this character. That's the one thing I love about Kurt Russell. No matter what he's in, he is able to give so much to a character that either doesn't have much to begin with, or unfortunately can't be explored due to the difficulties surrounding the production of the film. Looking back at his character, I just kind of kept telling myself, well, he's there. But I always remembered the amount of emotion that Kurt Russell brought to this character. And again, this is going off of a film I've only seen one time, and I was able to remember his character, despite how the character was majorly cut in the description. But there is a line that does indicate that he has PTSD when he says in the film, "I'm a real light sleeper, child." Like, that is a one way to say you have PTSD without having to say you have PTSD. But before we got the second collaboration of John Carpenter and Kurt Russell, there were some other contenders, and a lot of people know on this show that I like to share who could have been in the shoes of the main character. It's nice to know who could have been cast, and sometimes it can be really good, sometimes it can be really bad, but nonetheless, it's very interesting. And I'm looking at the list right here, and I'm very surprised with the people that showed up. Like, we could have had a very different film if any of these actors were cast instead of Kurt Russell. So right here, let me see. Nick Nolte was the top choice. He rejected it. It was also turned down by Jeff Bridges, Tom Bergener, Christopher Walken. Oh god, that would have been interesting. Scott Glenn. Okay, I can see Scott Glenn. I mentioned this guy on The Silence of the Lambs. I could very well see that. Roy Schneider. That's a little on the nose because he was from Jaws, but if he said we're gonna need a bigger boat, I would have shit my pants and laughed my ass off. Chris Christopherson. I can see that. Sam Shepard. Okay. Jack Thompson. Tom Atkins. Yeah, that makes sense. Tom Atkins is a sci-fi horror guy, so that makes sense. And Don Johnson. Oh my gosh, pre-Miami Vice Don Johnson? Damn, that's funny. It says here screenwriter Bill Lancaster wrote the script with Harrison Ford or Clint Eastwood in mind. Could you see Clint Eastwood in this thing? That man does not touch a sci-fi film. That man hasn't touched a sci-fi film since he was on Tarantula back in 1959. Man, that is funny. Oh my gosh. But it says here that everyone turned it down due to their issues with the scheduling, filming in extreme cold, or just appearing in a, quote, B movie. Now, with that thing that I just read, with that piece of information that I just read, I can see why the initial impression would be that it would feel like a B movie, because it does have the inklings of a B movie. Looking at everything for the fact that it's people in a isolated territory in the cold, and there is a alien coming after them. That is usually the blueprint for a sci-fi B movie. Things like Them with the giant ants, or you can kind of maybe squint and say, like, you know, Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, you know, for like a comedic horror approach, like something that doesn't feel like your usual blueprint for what is considered A-lister sci-fi horror films. After Alien came out, everything was, well, if you're not Alien, then what are you? You're a B movie. There's a high coattail to ride, and the thing was choosing to not ride the coattails of Alien to be something different, so people just didn't know how to feel about this film. So I can see why they would call this a B movie. The initial reactions of the actors are pretty accurate, and it kind of makes me feel like I was in the same boat when I first heard about the film, where I didn't know how to feel about it. When I first heard about this film when I was younger, I stayed away from it. Anything that had to do with isolated territories and a threat coming after people, I was like, nope, hard pass. I'm good. I like sleep at night. Sleep is very nice. It wasn't until I got older to learn about films to basically take the scares away and see what it took to make the scares happen. That there's a story behind the scary moments. And when I saw that story, and then I saw the story about how the story came to be, it really does make me appreciate the thing a lot more than I did when I was younger, when I was just terrified of it. But I do find it a little bit funny that, meanwhile, I was terrified at the thought of watching it, but people were just not on board with the thought of watching it. Very different initial reactions to this film as to why people stayed away from it. But when I did watch it, I'm glad that I was at a point in my life that I could appreciate it for what it was, that I knew who the actors were in the film and their recognition in their specific genres, like I mentioned with Kurt Russell being mainly an action man and him being in an action sci-fi film. Oh yeah, that fits the bill. Having Keith David, who's also a staple of horror films and other films in general, honestly just a big gem of horror movies in general. Having him in the film was also a really great addition to see the early works before he would go on to do other films. You know, as of recent, he was in Nope, and it's kind of funny to see he's come a long way from 1982, and then you go to 2022 for Nope. It's like, wow, that's a pretty cool, like, 40-year decade marker to see how far he came from The Thing. So this next segment, I didn't have a proper segue for it, but I felt that I couldn't not share this piece of very obscure information about a connection. Excuse me. I'm getting all choked up from it. A connection between The Thing and a little Tarantino film about hateful people called The Hateful Eight. I mean, the title speaks for itself. Turns out, the composer Ennio Morricone, God rest his soul, The Thing was one of the films that he was asked to compose for. John Carpenter did not use his own music. He decided to branch out and actually use some of his connections to get him a composer, and he's like, who better than Ennio, who had such a huge track record even for 1982. Man's been in the business a long time. John Carpenter chose the right man. And unfortunately, like I said, The Thing was received with negative responses. So Ennio Morricone's score virtually went unnoticed and just got buried into the film. It turns out there was new life for his music in The Hateful Eight. His unused score that he had reserved for The Thing, some segment I guess he put aside thinking, movie's got enough music, I'll just stash this for a rainy day. And that rainy day, excuse my voice, came up in 2015 with The Hateful Eight. Now isn't that remarkable? An unused score from 1982 has a connection to a film in 2015, and they're both virtually different films, but Ennio Morricone was able to make something that could work for any type of film. That's how great his music was, and how great of a composer he is. And, you know, now that I know his name, it's hard looking at movies the same way again, knowing, man, I never noticed this name in some of the hundreds of films that I noticed, and now The Thing is, well, probably makes 101. But the one pinnacle that doesn't get talked about enough, that I'm shocked is not talked about enough, is the title card of the film. And I'm not saying the words The Thing, I mean the opening of The Thing, where you see this torn lettering around the thing, and you see what appears to be smoke and fire going on behind it to be very alarming. And as I mentioned earlier, this film took some creative liberties on how to be creative with household items. And that's exactly what they did for the title card. They put, the title card is a fish tank. There's a fish tank behind that title card. And they put a black garbage bag in the fish tank, and they put a little bit of fire on it so it could start singeing, and it makes that burning smoke that we see for the title card. So they filmed that and then put The Thing on top of it, kind of like a little, like a template. Now think about that. Today we have an easier access to making things where we have like some animation going on in a video, kind of like the app CapCut, where you can take one of their templates and utilize that, and it just basically makes a really cool video for you. Meanwhile, we got John Carpenter and his studio putting a flaming pile of garbage in a fish tank to make this magic happen. I forgot, like, how clever studios can be to make something so unique without computer-generated effects, that they were just kind of putting things together. This is like Home Depot the movie, essentially. But the coolest thing that not many people know about with this title card, besides the cool thing I just explained with how they made the title card, is that it inspired The Secret of NIMH. So, I'm going to throw a random name your way. There is a guy named Philo Barnhart. He is a name that you might not know, but I'm pretty sure you're going to hear of the titles that I'm going to tell you about. Titles such as The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Rescuers Down Under. Honestly, you could throw a dart and you're going to find a film that he worked on with Disney or Don Bluth. Or anything, really. I mean, the man's just an amazing animation genius. So, Philo Barnhart and the people in the studio were scratching their heads trying to figure out how they want to do the opening for The Secret of NIMH. Like, it has to be very eye-catching. It has to be very interesting. Philo had watched The Thing and brought the film in to show the studio and pointed out how the opening for The Thing and how the fire and smoke was coming through the title card, that it has exactly what they're looking for, and said, we need to do something along the realm of this. This is exactly what we're looking for. And if you were to compare the opening to The Secret of NIMH to the opening of The Thing, they do look kind of like sisters in a way. I wouldn't say it's exactly the same, because The Secret of NIMH is an animated film, so they do have a little bit more arsenal to work with than having to put a pile of flaming garbage in a fish tank and record that. But it is cool to know that The Secret of NIMH was inspired by a horror film that was not given the proper acclaim back then. So here's this little animation studio that loves what The Thing is doing more than what anyone else was thinking at the time about The Thing. It's such an odd little touch that no one knows about, and I just felt like I needed to give this another echo to show how much The Thing really is a trailblazer, like quite literally and physically a trailblazer. But the movie about a mouse trying to get a cure for her son was technically one of the first to make an homage before the years to come that The Thing would have a more prominent legacy. The second to ever make notice and give highlights to The Thing is The X-Files. Season 1, Episode 8, called Ice, it's a pretty accurate title, is a direct homage to the film, and that's pretty cool. Looking at the time frame that The Thing came out in 1982, that episode of The X-Files came out when it was fresh to the TV screens in 1993, so we're looking at 11 years later, it finally gets to get a proper acclaim with it being used in other various forms of media. There was another one that I read that was, interesting is a good way to put it. It was remade into a animation from this character called Pingu. And from what I understand, Pingu is like it's kind of like a character that's in various situations. So they just kind of work around this character and use it as like parodies and stuff like that. It's still kind of new to me, but they did do a 2-minute remake of The Thing with this stop motion clay penguin character. It's never would have thought that in a million years. It's pretty interesting. It makes me wonder if John Carpenter has seen it, that there is another remake out there, albeit like a parody / remake. I mean, you can kind of squint your eyes or put quotation marks around remake, but I still think that's pretty cool that they went out of their way to make an homage to a film. And thinking on that, it's a lot better than the original process. It's a lot better than the initial reaction that John Carpenter had, that he was publicly denounced by the original creator, Christian Nigby, and then here's John Carpenter having a remake, and then his remake was remade, with the penguin, and I'm sure he was flattered by it. I'm sure he didn't pull a Christian Nigby. I think that's pretty cool. But the last piece of legacy that I do want to share, and this was the very first thing I read before I started getting more of my information for this episode. There is a tradition. Many of the British Antarctic research stations show The Thing as a part of their midwinter feast and celebration every year. That is beautiful and hysterical. An Antarctic research team watching a film about an Antarctic research team getting hunted by a shapeshifter. I love that. I love the irony of it all, that it's a film that kind of parallels like what their life is, minus the shapeshifter. I love that this film has now become a part of a tradition over in Britain, and I'm sure there's a lot of traditions that the Thing has shared with many places. It's like I always say, you choose how you want to be entertained, and it's nice when a film will find its way to be a part of a festivity, that it becomes its own unique entertainment. And that's just amazing, considering this is John Carpenter's favorite film he ever made. A man that made a film to make something different than other alien films was crapped on for this film for years until the proper acclaim went through. And no matter what happened, John Carpenter has always said this was his favorite film. Out of everything he made, Halloween, Escape from New York, The Fog, other various horror films, honestly, I've lost count how many films he's done, but out of everything, this is the one film that he loves more than anything in the world. That's really special. That was like the one thing, that was the one piece of information that truly made me feel different about this film, knowing this is John Carpenter's favorite film. When you know, like, there's favoritism involved with a film, it does make you feel differently, knowing this is precious to someone on a certain level. That this is the creator's own favorite part of their career. Out of all the films he's ever done, this is the one that is really something special. So I have one more thing. So before I get into the final talking points about this episode, I knew that there was no way around this episode without addressing the other thing, whatever that was. The prequel that came out in 2011, also called The Thing. That was weird. I saw that last year, the recommendation of my friend Lincoln, and, oh man, I don't know how I feel about it. I just don't. It's strange to know that it's a prequel, knowing that everything that happened in that film would eventually work its way into the events of the film in 1982, but the stretch is so far that it's hard to make that connection. It's unique and it's interesting to find out that this was meant to, like, go before the coattails of the Thing and to show, like, what happened, that the dog at the end, this is a spoiler, that the dog at the end of the prequel is possibly the same dog that we saw at the beginning of the Thing that does have a bad fate. That's wonderful. But it took a credit scene to find out that that is what makes it a prequel. If there was other references, like maybe if you had this set like in the 80s, and if you told us we were in the 80s and everyone looked like they were in the 80s, then it'd be a bit more believable. I mean, kind of a strange reference, but remember when The Sopranos was on TV? Remember the prequel movie that came out to show what Tony Soprano was like before The Sopranos? That's how you make a prequel. This was just blech, ugh, no. For as much as, like, I can respect the original Thing from 1982, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it enough to know that prequel film does not really do the justice. It just did not have enough of a presence, not enough of a staple from John Carpenter for what he put in there. It was crafted to perfection from John Carpenter and his friends, and then the prequel that came out to kind of follow the coattails while also, like I said, kind of being in the same speed and pace and realm of the original is not there, man. Ugh. And what's funny is that, kind of a random side note, when I was watching the prequel to The Thing and my friend Lincoln was watching the original remake of The Thing from 1982, she kept coming back to me saying, "Oh, the effects are terrible in this." And I'm like, girl! She was the one that told me that what I was watching was a prequel, and I'm really glad that she told me. Otherwise, I would have thought that was a straight-up remake. It definitely needed another title or something, or direction, or everything. Everything about it needed to be different. But I just felt like that had to be mentioned. I felt like I couldn't just not mention the prequel. You know, it's as a favor to make sure that it's still mentioned in the same realm. Like, as much as I don't like it existing with the Thing, it does exist with the Thing. Well, all things considered, that is a wrap on the Thing. Thank you so much for being here for this episode. I have to say that I really enjoyed having my mind changed about this movie. The Thing is not one of my favorite horror movies, but it is a movie that I can respect. If I hear the trials and tribulations of how hard someone is willing to work for a film, they got my attention, they got my respect. And I am glad that I did finally get a chance to watch this movie and be one of the people to give it the proper flowers that it deserves. And with that said, let's find out what the next episode is going to be on the Halloween series for the Screen Queen. Alright, I got my little bucket of suggestions here, so about to find out together. Are you ready? I'm not, so let's go with it. Give me something. Okay, what are you? I have like 1,000 pieces in my hand. What are you? Show me your secrets. Well, I guess this just had to fall right into place. I have no problems with that. Well, I have a bit of a wild card I hold in my hands here. The next episode on the Screen Queen is going to be Gravity Falls. Oh, that is an amazing way to get into that. It's kind of a funny parallel, because last year we had Courage, now we have another beloved children's TV show. That's it. I think my system's working against me. Well, anyway, I can't defy the logic and law and order of what the lotto system tells me, so I'm just going to do what it tells me to do, and that is going to be our next episode. And that is a wrap for me. If you'd like to catch up with me in between uploads, you can find me on my Instagram at the Queen of the Scream if you have some things to talk about with this recent episode. If you want to see the funny movie-related content, you can find me on my TikTok at The Mystical Space Witch. And if you're interested in the book series that I wrote, you can find that in the description box. Alrighty, you all take care now, and happy fall. This is your Screen Queen, signing off. Bye-bye!